Good afternoon. My name is Dave Brockman. I'm the DOE Richland manager, and on behalf of Shirley Olinger and myself, we'd like to welcome everybody. Today is the outbrief of the independent assessment of that Inez Trier, the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management, chartered. Today is the outbrief. As you know, Glenn Podonsky, his office, the Chief Health and Safety and Security Officer, office led the independent assessment, and we're going to hear the outbrief of that today. There's a slight change in the agenda, and we had a pre-meeting, and the decision was that Mr. Staker would give his outbrief first, and then the two independent reviews from Dr. Tuccaro and Dr. Martini would come right after that. Martini, excuse me. So it's just a slight change. What I thought would be important is that we go around the table here and just introduce ourselves real quick and tell us what your title is. So why don't we start down on the end with Susan.
Susan Leckband, Chair of the Hanford Advisory Board.
Mark Fisher, current Chairman of the Beryllium Awareness Group.
I'm Dave Molna, President of the Hanford Atomic Metal Trades Council.
Shirley Olinger. Oh, thank you, Dave. Shirley Olinger, the Department of Energy Manager for Office of River Protection.
Dave Brockman, Manager, Richland Operations Office.
Tom Staker, Director of the Office of Environment, Safety, and Health Evaluations in HSS, and the leader of the team.
Glenn Podonsky, Chief Health, Safety, and Security Officer for the Department of Energy.
Inez Trier, Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management in the Department of Energy.
Tim Tuccaro, Associate Dean for Research at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver.
John Martini, Associate Professor, National Jewish Medical and Research Center in Denver, Colorado.
George Baxter, Principal Manager, Advanced Med, Hanford.
John Lehue, President of CH2M Hill Plateau Remediation Company.
Frank Armijo, President of Mission Support Alliance.
Neil Brosey, President, Washington Closure, Hanford.
Okay, thank you. Again, Shirley and I want to we welcome the review. We got the report today, and we're committed to putting a solid corrective action plan in place to address the issues raised and make sure they're implemented in an open manner. So with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Tom Staker. He is, Glenn Podonsky, the Chief of Health, Safety, and Security for the Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. He is going to start the outbrief. Glenn?
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Assistant Secretary Trier, for coming, and thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. This is highly unusual for our outbriefs. We normally have an outbrief on our inspections. It's normally with the contractors and the managers. But in discussions with Assistant Secretary Trier, we thought it best to be totally open, transparent, so that you would hear everything that is contained in the report. And at the end of the outbrief, the reports will be made available for you. They're also going to be online starting tomorrow. This inspection was the concept of Assistant Secretary Trier. She knew from correspondence from the HAB and from members of the BAG a lot of concerns relative to beryllium at the site. And we first talked about coming out to do an assist visit and take a look at what was going on, and we talked to Dave Brockman. But after lengthy discussions about what would be best for all, Assistant Secretary Trier asked that we do this as an inspection. And in the course of doing this, in our discussions with the Hanford Advisory Board, the BAG, and HAMTech, we also decided it would be best if all the groups would participate. Not just participate getting briefings from us, but being part of the nightly meetings that we have, so that everybody knew what was going on at every moment of the inspection. And the whole purpose of that was to make sure that we shared the information on a real-time basis. Tom Staker and his team have done inspections for 20 years in the Department of Energy. but we've never had one of this magnitude. And it was vitally important that because so many people were involved, that we have open communications, and that's what we strive for. Now, the report has been factually validated, which is part of what we do with our process. And by making it available today, that's also something that we haven't done in our previous 20 years. The report is normally available on the web in about a month. So Tom and his people really put forth a lot of effort to make sure that it was available immediately at the closeout so that you would all have the opportunity to read in great detail what the team found. The other thing that was unique about this inspection is while I report to the Secretary of Energy and my organization is independent of the rest of the department, independent of any program office. We decided, because of your urging, that we also had 3 other independent individuals, Dr. Takaro and Dr. Martini and who was the other one? Lisa Meyer. Those 3 individuals added another layer of independence on top of ours. Now let me just talk for a moment about independence. We work for the Department of Energy. Yes, we're part of the government, but we're people. We work in the government as our livelihood, but that doesn't mean that we're not trustworthy. That doesn't mean that we don't believe in you folks as people, any more or less than the site office or EM or the program office. What has happened over time, I have seen this in my short 26 years in the department, is that oftentimes people start talking past one another, and we lose sight of what's important. And I know Secretary Chu and I know Assistant Secretary Trier value everybody's health and safety. And that's not just cheap words. As I've said, I've worked for 9 Secretaries of Energy. The cheap words are when nobody does anything to fix the problems. And I have every confidence that as we leave the report with Dave Brockman and the EM family, I have every confidence that what's different this time is that there's commitment. There's a commitment to take care of the issues that are contained in the report. There's also a commitment, I know, to keep everybody included in the fixes that are in the report. And that's very important for consistency. And Assistant Secretary Trier and I had a conversation, and she was extremely caring about making sure that what gets fixed stays fixed. So our independence comes from serving the Secretary, reporting to Congress, but it also comes from working with everybody. And our job is not to be the shell answer people. Our job is to find truth, help find solutions so that we can get the job done and do it effectively, efficiently, and also make sure that the workers remain healthy and safe. So I want to thank you all for coming out. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Tom Staker, who a short 3 months ago started on this journey. And I told him we could probably do this in about a month. And he told me, no, it's going to be about 3 months. The other thing I would say is I've committed to Dave and Shirley and Assistant Secretary Trier is that when the HSS team leaves, we'll still stay engaged in whatever EM needs from us or would like clarification, or for you as a community, whatever you need from us, we will coordinate and work with EM. We're not just walking away. The other thing that I'd like to share with you all, this report is important enough that we'll be able to look at it for lessons learned throughout the Department of Energy. It's not just here at Richland. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom Staker. And again, thank you, Assistant Secretary Trier and Dave and Shirley. Appreciate all your assistance. And for the HAB and the BAG and the HAMTech, thank you all.
Thank you, Glenn. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'd like to start out by thanking some of the folks that helped us out with this particular inspection. Craig Hall, Tom Peterson worked tirelessly to help us out. We had an active beryllium awareness group, the Hanford Advisory Board's interest. And we had a number of representatives from Hamtech that helped us along the way. I remember at the start of this review, one night we had a 3-hour and 15-minute team meeting with all these folks together. I wondered at the end of that meeting if anyone would come back the next day, including my own team members. And not only did they come back, but they brought more folks with them, and we continued to have good discussions. I also appreciated the participation of the BAG chairperson, Mark Fisher, and again, the Hamtech representatives, in not only coming to our meetings and participating in those, but helping us with inspection activities, including facility walkthroughs, observing work activities, and making arrangements to interview workers interested in providing their perspective on the Hanford Beryllium program. And I know Craig, you and Tom helped us out with that too. I recognize a lot of the folks are here today, and we really appreciate all your help and your participation in this effort. As Glenn indicated, we have a proven process to conduct inspections that includes rigorous reviews with a focus on performance. While conduct of this inspection included reviews of documents, interviews, attended meetings, we also spent time walking through the facilities. We attended training sessions, observed work. One team member actually went through the medical clearance process for site beryllium workers. We also, as Glenn mentioned, have a validation process to ensure that our reports are not only comprehensive but accurate. And we completed that a few weeks ago. I'd like to talk a little bit about the results of the inspection, and I think first of all it's important to understand that the status of the site beryllium program at the time of this inspection, a new site-wide chronic beryllium disease prevention program had been established, and efforts to implement the new program were underway. Development of the new program is significant in that it required agreement among several site environmental management contractors and the site medical provider. It's important to note that PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, has its own program and therefore is not part of the Hanford site program, nor was it within the scope of this inspection. In addition to the EM and medical contractors, representatives from several stakeholder groups, including the BAG and Hamtech, were involved in the development of the new program. The program has a number of positive features. First, it includes an action level below the regulatory requirement. The program also requires consistent training, posting, and a common beryllium work permit, reducing the potential for errors and making it easier for individuals to work across the site. Several of our team members attended the beryllium worker training provided to Hammer facility and found it to be comprehensive and well presented. Although a small amount of erroneous information was found in the training materials, this was provided for correction. A chronic beryllium disease prevention program committee was established to provide a venue for addressing issues and facilitating continuous improvement. For many work activities involving beryllium hazards that we observed, the controls were appropriate. As part of the effort to implement the new program, efforts were underway to reassess and characterize facilities in order to identify and evaluate areas of legacy contamination. We also observed that there were multiple options available for information and support regarding beryllium. For example, it was readily apparent that the BAG members were very active and engaged in supporting recently affected workers. Overall, we viewed that the new program was an opportunity to establish a best-in-class program to protect workers, prevent future sensitization and chronic beryllium disease, and care for those affected from past practices. And we wanted to make sure that our review helped facilitate that. However, at the start of our review, we had a number of concerns. One concern that was identified to us by stakeholders and other individuals was regarding the timeliness of implementation of the new program. Our view into implementation activities also showed that inadequacies in direction and oversight from the department's Richland Operations Office and Office of River Protection, combined with a lack of clear plans, were inhibiting timely implementation. There were also concerns regarding recently diagnosed cases of sensitization and/or chronic beryllium disease. It's important to note that sensitization and chronic beryllium disease can occur many years after exposure, so a recent diagnosis could be from recent or past exposures. Although work such as machining of beryllium containing components occurred in the past, potential exposure sources today are primarily due to contamination from past use and practices and/or older equipment where beryllium-containing parts were used, such as older breakers where they contain beryllium copper alloys. Because of this, careful review is necessary to ensure that the locations of contamination are identified. That's why the department's beryllium rule requires a careful process to assess past performance and perform characterization surveys to identify the presence of beryllium. Past reviews at Hanford's were limited, and the ongoing effort presented an opportunity to get it right. However, our review of the ongoing initiative indicated that some aspects of the effort were not sufficiently rigorous and comprehensive to provide a fully reliable basis to establish the needed controls to protect workers. Another important element of the department's beryllium rule is the requirement to analyze new cases of sensitization and/or chronic beryllium disease. Evaluation of the medical, job, and exposure data for these individuals is essential to identify workers at risk for exposure, understand the beryllium health risks, and identify actions to improve the chronic beryllium disease prevention program. However, these required reviews were stopped several years ago, a missed opportunity. Both the identification of sources of beryllium and the analysis of diagnosis collectively are essential in establishing the foundation from which the basic controls in support of an effective program. Deficiencies were also identified in a number of other elements of the chronic beryllium disease prevention program that were being implemented by the site operating contractors and medical contractor. Some examples included, while the training for beryllium workers we attended was satisfactory, training for other individuals with associated responsibilities, such as supervisors and work planners, was not addressed. We observed a number of activities identifying beryllium as a hazard, and while some of these activities were conducted with appropriate controls, others exhibited deficiencies in processes and implementation. We visited a number of facilities where the presence of beryllium was known or suspected, and in some cases found that postings that are essential in alerting workers to these areas were not in accordance with the requirements and sometimes not in place. Proper implementation of work controls is essential in protecting workers, co-located workers, included those affected by beryllium, and transient personnel. While there were many sources of information on beryllium, many of these were out of date or inaccurate. For example, there were several lists of facilities where beryllium has been found. None of these lists were current or accurate at the time of the review. Support for and communications with affected workers were not always effective. For example, counseling for affected workers, although required, was not always being conducted in accordance with protocols. Also, a few years back, a decision was made to require the site medical provider to inform employers when individuals that may have been exposed to beryllium due to past work activities participated in voluntary medical screenings. Many of these individuals felt that this voluntary testing was a private matter, and this change violated their right to privacy. As a result of this change, approximately 500, or over 1/3 of the participants in this program, dropped out. These individuals are no longer provided the benefits of the program, and we need to get them back into the program. In part due to recent personnel action, there are a shortage of medical staff to support the beryllium program. There are some weaknesses in protocols for the medical portion of the beryllium program, and some deficiencies in workplace monitoring records and insufficient clarity regarding implementation and integration of some medical policies and protocols and the methods for interfacing between the medical program and other elements of the chronic beryllium disease prevention program. The Beryllium Awareness Group has recently indicated their lack of confidence in the site medical provider. Many opportunities for improving the medical program exist. Many stakeholders here have been passionately advocating for an effective beryllium program. The Hanford Advisory Board, the Beryllium Affected Workers Group, and HAMTech. However, weaknesses in communications and management of some of these concerns have hindered resolution and in some cases contributed to mistrust. Program oversight, assessments, and resolution of past concerns have not been effective. Several concerns that were identified in the 2002 Hanford Joint Council report match up with those in two recent letters from the Hanford Advisory Board and are similar to what was found during this inspection. For example, concerns regarding communications, lists of beryllium contaminated facilities, and analyzing and understanding the causes of recent diagnoses were identified by both groups. Differences in perception are also contributing to conflicts between groups. While some individuals here look at the recent results of air monitoring samples that for the most part are below the detection limit, they also look at current assessment and characterization results identifying few buildings as contaminated and the influx of workers from other sites where exposures could have occurred as an indication that recent diagnoses are from past exposure or from exposure at other work sites. Others look at these recent diagnoses as indicating that the program is failing. Without adequate analysis, we cannot know. During the inspection, the Department's Office of Environmental Management, the Richland Operations Office, and Office of River Protection appropriately directed several interim actions in response to this review. However, a wide range of additional specific concerns were raised during the inspection, and many were confirmed. The report provides a number of findings and opportunities for improvement to address identified weaknesses. The findings require formal corrective action plans and careful analysis of the opportunities for improvement, coupled with effective oversight, will be essential in assuring that the Hanford site beryllium program is fully effective in protecting workers, preventing cases of future sensitization, and instances of chronic beryllium disease. Because of the many legacy hazards left from the Cold War, work at the Hanford site is challenging. Implementation of the new chronic beryllium disease prevention program is a responsibility and an opportunity. Let's get it right. Thank you. I'll now open up for John Martini and Tim Tuccaro.
Thanks, Tom. John Martini with National Jewish Medical Center. And first I wanted to spend just a minute or two talking about sort of our role as we saw it in this evaluation of the chronic beryllium disease prevention program here, and how we perceived how everything went, if you will. We were initially contacted, and I came down during the first evaluation after the scoping visit with the group. And I have to admit, I had not been associated with Tom's group with HSS before, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. The group certainly let us have freedom to go anywhere we wanted and talk to anybody that we wanted, either independently with them or to join in on anybody that they were interviewing at the time. They also were really looked in great depth at the whole facility, and so I was very impressed, and I did not see them pulling any punches whatsoever. So, and I believe I even mentioned to the BAG at the time that really Tom's group really had done a really good job of getting in and evaluating the program here. So we as the independent people in the group, as we were supposed to be, we really took part in both the evaluation during the day, also the evaluations in the evening, and everybody was very free talking about what they wanted to talk about. And Tom's group was very, very good at taking the suggestions that we had for improvement and incorporating those into his report. And so we were pretty happy about that. We also, both Lisa and I came out and spent some time with AMH looking at the medical portion of the program, and once again had we were not impeded at all, and were able to actually independently take a look at the facility or at the AMH medical program and get a pretty good idea in the short time that we had of how that was functioning and some of the pluses and minuses of that program. We then came on a revisit with both myself, Lisa, and Dr. Takaro, and also were able to meet with members of the BAG, meet with members, employees, and things independently off-site, actually in the hotel and things, so that we weren't even on site. And once again, we're able to do that totally independently and things. So general impressions were really the evaluation was very thorough, in my opinion. The evaluation was objective and really was conducted by qualified individuals. I think everybody that worked in the program from HSS did a really, really good job and certainly ferreted out a number of improvements that'll be very important to the facility. We certainly felt listened to. I think Dr. Takaro and myself and Dr. Meyer really felt that we were listened to by the group, and so all of our suggestions were incorporated into the report that Tom just outlined there. But we did want to mention a few things of special emphasis, at least to us, that may at least, that we feel we just want to mention a little bit in explaining when you look at the report, at least that these areas really need to be looked at. The first thing I want to talk about real quickly is the determination of Beryllium background at the facility. And Larry, one of Tom's people, did a really good job of trying to point out that in fact the determination of the Beryllium background at 2 parts per million probably is a little bit too conservative away from it makes it conservative so that you would not consider a building to be contaminated when in fact it might have been. We think it should actually be swung the other direction. In fact, that you really want to be confident that the building did not have beryllium did not have beryllium work contaminating the building, at the risk of having some buildings classified as beryllium contaminated when in fact they might not be. And so we would like that swing toward that direction, as opposed to making sure that the building really was contaminated. This way you err more toward the side of the worker protection. The median probably is somewhere around 1 part per million instead of the 2 parts per million that the facility is now looking at. And there's a pretty good write-up on that in the document itself, and hopefully people will take a good look at that. The second thing that we wanted to talk about is the determination of a beryllium-free area. Anybody that is a beryllium-affected worker at least has the option to be assigned to a beryllium-free, if there is such a thing, or at least a low exposure area, if you will, at the facility. And we want to caution the facility that making that determination using air samples is a very difficult thing to do. And the reason for that is that if you have beryllium processes going on, you can monitor that beryllium process and make absolutely sure of what the levels are for that process. Unfortunately, in your case, in the case of Hanford, you don't have beryllium processes going on. So what you're really looking at is whether there's contamination there that can become airborne. And essentially, you're looking for an upset condition. Upset conditions are very difficult to find because they may only occur once in a great while. And so it's very, very important that you really look and see what the potential is for an upset condition. And in my opinion, and I think the opinion of Dr. Caro and Dr. Meyer, is that the best way to do that is actually using wipe samples as opposed to looking at air samples, because you just may not catch an upset condition. So the only other option, which we would not suggest, would be to make sure that you have an upset condition, such as using a leaf blower or something like that when you sample. That would create many, many problems of its own, and so we would not suggest that you do that. I want to mention a minute about wipe samples, though, and taking wipe samples. The method that's used, two methods are used by the facility. One of those is they wipe an area. If the area has a lot of dust, they actually use a cassette and sample the area by collecting the dust. If the area does not have very much dust, then they wipe the area, normally 100 square centimeter area, by using a wipe. The difficulty and work that we have done has really shown that the cassette only removes very, very loose material. And so to really get a true picture of what's in a 100 square centimeter area, you really need to also use not only just the cassette, not only the cassette to pull up the loose dust, but it also needs to be wiped and the two added together to find the true beryllium level that was in that particular 100 square centimeters. This may sound unimportant, but in a lot of cases, the beryllium that was actually there from any beryllium processes that might have occurred in that building that's been there for quite some time is probably in that layer of dust. It's a little bit more difficult to remove using that cassette unless you actually start disturbing it by mechanical means. So what you're really after is to find out what your worst case might be. Therefore, we would suggest that you sample that way. Those are just two of the things. We actually had a number of suggestions, all of which were incorporated in the report, but industrial hygiene-wise, I just wanted to mention those. In concluding just the industrial hygiene portion, I want to say that I really believe that this report is a good evaluation of the program here. I would also like to emphasize that probably the most important part of the report is the last chapter, which are opportunities for improvement. And many of the things that will really make this program a top program are in that last chapter. So don't skip the last chapter, please. And now Dr. Takaro will give the medical portion.
Thanks very much, John. It's a pleasure to be able to address you today and comment on the report. First, I would agree with John on the independence component. I certainly concur with his assessment of that. At no time did I feel like I had my hands tied by the department or any of the contractors. I would just like to give a little background on my own presence here at Hanford. I first got introduced to Hanford during my medical training, I hate to say, 25 years ago, and have been in the Northwest until I moved to Canada 5 years ago. So it's a real pleasure to come back to Hanford and see old friends. It was also somewhat depressing to come back to Hanford and see old problems, not the same as the old friends. The work that I had done previously here included diagnosing the first case of chronic beryllium disease at the site. I would reiterate a bit of Tom's comments because I want to bring out a few points as John did that he did in his overview. First, this notion of exposure. There is current beryllium hazards on the site, and this actually comes up every few months. A new source of beryllium is found on the site. So I want to be very clear that the notion that the sensitization and chronic beryllium disease that we're seeing here at Hanford is all from another point in time or all from another site, DOE site, that the worker came to Hanford and brought with them. There is certainly possibilities that Some of the sensitization and disease that we're seeing here is from another place and from another point in time, but because we know there are current hazards here, we cannot rest on that assumption. And it is very likely that exposure is happening at Hanford, and I would refer to the population at the -5 facility as an example of where that is a real possibility. And there are several other cohorts where I think that is a possibility. What this means is that we really need to focus hard on the sentinel cases, those workers that have become sensitized or diseased here at Hanford. There are now over 130 of them. They have very important information about ongoing exposures here at the site. And as Tom mentioned, the initiative to really drill down into their work histories and their potential points of exposure has lapsed over the last few years, and that resource has to be retapped and retapped vigorously. Mailed out surveys are not enough. You need detailed occupational histories taken with an experienced industrial hygienist familiar with the site and familiar with beryllium exposure. Secondly, the worker involvement component, which is of course related to that identification of sentinel cases, is a key to the success of the program. I think everybody knows that, but it has also lapsed over the last several years, and Tom mentioned the loss of over 500 participants in the voluntary testing program is a real example of that lapse. There needs to be no disincentives for workers to be tested. And it's extremely important that we give the workers enough confidence in the integrity of the program that they will re-enlist in the voluntary protection component. Because it's only through that testing that we will understand fully the risks here at the site. And in turn, identify those sentinel cases that need to have more detailed work histories taken. There has been some comment about the approach taken to lymphocyte proliferation testing, the test for sensitization for chronic beryllium disease, and the notion of using split sampling, in other words, taking a sample and splitting it, sending it to 2 labs, as a way of increasing the sensitivity of the test. We do not believe that this is a useful approach. We think that split sampling in a population like this is a waste of resources, that where you pick up new cases is through the repeated sampling over time. So workers need to be not just tested once, but tested annually over time, and it's through that method that you will increase the sensitivity of the program. And it's much more cost-effective and much more efficacious in terms of detecting new cases than split sample use. Now, when a worker retires, and that last test, that is a reasonable time to use a split sample test, but I think at other times it's a waste of resources, and the other independent members agree with this. Finally, I'd like to emphasize what I know Assistant Secretary Trias is going to talk a lot about, and that is where do we go from here? The implementation of this program is really where the work begins. Yes, it was an intense time getting this report together, but that was only the beginning. Now the real work comes, and that's in implementation. And I think, as John mentioned, you've got to get to the end of the report to get the full meat of the report, and that is in the opportunities of improvement. Those opportunities will need bird dogging, and I know that there are many good bird dogs in this room, including the Hanford Advisory Board, including the Beryllium Awareness Group, including many oversight bodies within the department. And it's your responsibility to make sure that this report is used, that you keep the Richlands Operations Office and ORP on track and focusing on these opportunities for improvement. They are excellent lessons for other parts of the DOE complex. And I think that with the experience that you've gained, you have a lot to offer the rest of the complex. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. Thank you to the Chief of Health, Safety and Security for the Department of Energy, Glenn Podansky, his excellent colleagues, Tom, and other colleagues, and of course, the independent experts that were brought to the table from the efforts of all of you. Thank you so much also to the Hanford Advisory Board, to the Beryllium Awareness Group, for bringing to my attention some of the issues that we had associated with the chronic beryllium disease prevention program. We think that this report really represents a roadmap for the things that we need to do, and I am very pleased to not only thank you for your efforts, but also embrace the report. We will follow the recommendations. We will ensure that we take every opportunity for improvement and make this particular chronic beryllium disease prevention program at Hanford best in class. We also commit to using those lessons learned around the complex. My principal deputy has engaged the entire complex in the environmental management portfolio, and we have made sure that they understand not only the effort that we were going through here, but also we are going to make sure that everybody understands the opportunities that we have. In addition to that, thank you very much to HAMTech. We appreciate all of the efforts that you have put into raising the appropriate level of awareness on behalf of the workers. We are extremely committed to worker safety. I think that there is no daylight between Shirley Ollinger, Dave Brogman, and myself in embracing this report and using this as an opportunity to ensure that in moving forward, there is proactive action when it comes to implementing these recommendations and taking these opportunities for improving, implementing the program as well as improving it. We embrace the independence of this review, and we will be availing ourselves of the independent expertise, not only of our own Office of Health, Safety and Security, but also the independent expertise that has been brought to bear. I can also speak for our contractors, when I say that our commitment is very real, that our actions are going to be proactive, that we will ensure that we bring the resources to the table to follow the recommendations, make sure that our corrective actions not only are robust, but they stay the course, and that we are not losing ground as the time elapses. It is very important for the workers, the community, our colleagues throughout the federal government to understand that we are committed to these corrective actions and that we will work proactively. We welcome the oversight, the advisory role of the Hanford Advisory Board, of the Beryllium Awareness Group, but hopefully they will not have to remind us of our responsibilities. We will endeavor to make sure that they understand that we know that we are responsible for these corrective actions, that we're responsible for this program, that we are committed to the safety of our workers, and that we are going to proactively share with them the corrective actions that we have instituted and how we press forward, making sure that all of those actions get institutionalized and embedded in this program. With that, we will take questions. Before we take questions, I would like to give Dave Brockman and Shirley Ollinger the opportunity to, in particular, Dave, explain some of the resources that we have brought to bear to ensure that this program is going to be proactive in the corrective actions that we must take in a timely manner. So, Dave?
Okay, thanks, Inez. We're, and Shirley can speak for herself, of course, and she will, but we're committed to putting together the corrective action plan post-haste. We'll be on that. We've had the chance to look at the draft, as you did in the factual finding, and have paid attention. So we'll get the corrective action plan put together and start the corrective action plans and continue the ones we've already started. We've assigned a project manager, Pete Garcia. He's a senior DOE GS-15 manager in the health and safety. He's going to be assigned to this full-time to see that the program, that the corrective action plan gets produced and implemented, and he has all the authority to hold people accountable to this. We're also bringing on additional resources. We are going to have a full-time IH assigned to this. We're going to have a workers advocate that the Beryllium workers can reach out to help them through process. You know, it's much like we've done with our former workers program that's been very effective. And this person is going to be knowledgeable, guaranteed, be knowledgeable, and be useful the day they show up. So there's, and we'll put whatever resources we need to get this done. We'll be working with our contractors. We sent out a letter, as many of you know, that asks that in 30 days a certain number of actions be completed. We have received those back. We know where we are. The contractors have all completed their actions, with the exception of one that's doing a phased implementation with our concurrence. And but those actions are going to be verified 100% by us before we're satisfied that they're complete. So I guess I'll leave it at that and let Shirley add her.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for the support of this review. It looks like we have a lot of great opportunities for improvement to look at, and I'm looking forward to how this will improve not only the Beryllium program, but the other programs, such as their chemical vapor program, which has very similar issues, really, when you think about it. And it'll make us stronger, so I appreciate all the concerns and the communication back to us as managers here. And definitely, if you don't think we're doing the right things, if you don't think that we're on task, please give us a call, hold us accountable. I've asked my deputy, John Dowell, to attend the open bag meetings and to get very seriously engaged in the implementation so that we ensure that we don't drop the ball. So thank you.
Before we take your questions, let me just close by saying that in addition to the efforts of the Office of River Protection and the Richland office, we are going to have an individual from that works for the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Safety and Operations Oversight, Dr. Steve Cron. We're going to have an individual who works for him deployed here to Hanford so that that individual can streamline communications between the two sites, the contractors and headquarters, and so that I can stay engaged and vigilant about the progress that I am sure Dave, Shirley, and the contractors are going to be making, and that we can also take the lessons learned to the rest of the complex. We're also going to have another individual that is going to be at headquarters that I believe some of you have worked with in the past, Terry Kreitz, that works directly for Dr. Steve Cron to assist Jim Davis, who's going to be here at Hanford, in that streamlined communication between the site and headquarters. You have our commitment. We know how important implementing this program and these corrective actions is. And in addition to that, you have our commitment that worker safety is paramount in the environmental management program, that safety is a core value of our program, and that everything that we do needs to clearly demonstrate that commitment to worker safety and to safety as a core value of our program. So with that, I will open the floor, and clearly if the questions are on the report, one of our colleagues are going to answer the questions. The questions are on path forward. One of us in the environmental management program will take the question. There are 2 microphones available.
Dr. Trey, I've got something to say. In regards to these independent reports, just so I'm clear, are these independent reports, or was this a report that was supplied to these 2 independents for either agreement, comments, or whatever? Were they true independent investigations? What I'm getting at is, did you come out and do your investigation and come up with the results of what you found and then supplied it to these guys for either concurrence, questions, comments, or whatever?
No, actually,
I just want to be clear on that.
yes, I understand. When we first came out to start gathering data for the review, John Martini and Lisa Meyer were out here with us collecting data. Now, Tim wasn't available at the beginning, so he came in at a later date, but they were actually out here interviewing folks and looking, as John said, sometimes together with our folks and sometimes on their own. So they had free rein to look at whatever they wanted.
And you're confident that your recommendations or your comments or your review of this is included in this report?
Yeah, and let me even give you a little bit more of an idea. Not only did we participate, but we also submitted our concerns, if you will, to Tom's group, and asked him to incorporate those in the report. Probably the only difference, we sort of gave bullets, and Tom's report is a little bit more in dialogue, but generally speaking, we actually supplied we supplied him with our report, and our report was melded into his. So we're very comfortable that all of our comments, at least, were pulled up by the report. You know, and I'm sure that Tom could even give you our reports that we sent to them, but we did send our separate reports.
Thank you. I'm certainly encouraged by Dr. Treya and Glenn's and Dave and Shirley's commitment to the safety of the workforce. You know, and is, to put it bluntly, it's about time. It was definitely certainly clear to the HAMTAC anyway that the prior White House administration had different ideas on how to protect the people performing critical work for the federal government. So I'm extremely encouraged. I've talked with Dr. Trey and Glenn and Dave with our site-wide programs and having worker involvement. Hopefully, we'll do the right thing for these people. Unfortunately, it's too late for some. Like I said, it's about time, and we're encouraged by your support, and we look forward to that. I did note that Dave talked about having an IHT. I don't know if this has been breached or not. I've talked with Mark Fisher about this, but I'd certainly like to see, as far as HAMTAC, we have full support. We have workers out there that are doing this, and Mark Fisher is not only a worker out there, but he's also the chair of the Beryllium group. I'd like to see what can be done about funding a full-time position for the chair of the BAG. Just not, Mark's on loan right now as an employee doing this, so I'd like to see full funding for the chairman of the Beryllium Awareness Group. And
You will have it.
Have Mark involved as the chair.
There's no reason
not
for
just an employee, but as the chair for the BAG. I'd really like to see the full funding for that. He can be on this team. HAMTAC can be on the team, and we can work together to do what we can to protect these people from being exposed.
Yeah, Shirley, Dave, and I are completely supportive of that, Dave, of your leadership, and this is one of those clear actions that we can take right away without further deliberation.
Well, I'd also like to, I don't know what can be done. It's extremely unfortunate that, we talk about the reduction in the workers being part of the program, the 500, and there's a reason for that. I mean, obviously, we ought to be concerned about our own safety. The contractors ought to be concerned about it. You ought to be concerned about it as well. But when the disclosure is made, then the contractors, they have certain responsibilities to keep these people away from, keep people out of harm's way. Mm-hmm. And so that limits the workers' ability to be flexible amongst the workforce. And so when they move them around, there's nowhere else to go, they don't have jobs. And so they're worried about that. And I don't know, I'm not quite sure exactly what can be done. I mean, obviously we don't want to put them in a corner and call it, well, you're the Beryllium guys, so we're going to put you there for observation. Something needs to be done. The reason why you don't get participation is because they're not going to have any jobs. Their supervisors are being, they've got to adhere to the laws. Mm-hmm. And once they're sensitized or they have the disease, they've got to be kept out of harm's way. And then when there's nothing else left to do with them, they don't have a job anymore. And that's their concern. We've got, especially since we're working on the legacy of the beryllium exposures out there, we've got 20 and 30-year employees out there that no longer have a job through no fault of their own. So I'd like to see something done about that.
We will certainly work on that. I understand what the concern is, and we will work diligently on trying to identify a path forward.
Thank you.
I have to address Dr. DeCaro about the split samples. Are you just talking routine surveillance, or are you talking no split samples for people with single borderlines or abnormal chest x-rays? Or because somebody's going to say, no split samples here.
Yeah, sorry, thanks for the clarification. I'm talking about routine surveillance. Okay. And it's a matter of the efficient use of resources, but also the biology of the test actually increases the chance of false positivity with a split sample used in a mass manner, such as routine sampling would be. So in the case of questionable borderlines or other issues related to a result, no, that is in the clinical realm, and split sampling is often quite appropriate.
I, as an affected worker, and I hope the rest of the affected workers in this room stand up and say thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I intend to meet with the affected workers today, so we're the ones who have to thank you for your work in preventing others. from getting to the point, that they are affected by beryllium. We definitely are the ones who need to thank you and commend you for your commitment to your fellow workers. Anything else? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. Dr. Takar, I hate to beat this horse to death, but split samples, for clarifications, I understand the Beryllium workers, when they come in, they get tested every year for medical qualifications. So they're tested every year. So what you're saying is you pick these false negatives up. The people in the voluntary program are tested every 3 years. Did you still mean that, or people in the voluntary program that are being tested every 3 years, or somebody who's going to retire, then it's a good idea to do a split sample on them?
Yeah, the concept is that if you have over time multiple samples, your sensitivity will rise relative to the single split sample. And so for a worker in a monitoring program, be it an annual program or every 3 years, that longitudinal power is adequate to make the split sample not necessary, and in fact a waste of resources. The reason to do one at the retirement is the presumption that the worker will not necessarily be getting as regular blood tests. Now, if they enroll in the former worker program, maybe they will. Ideally, they would, in fact, get on a 3-year basis indefinitely, in which case the split sample is not so necessary. But to be safe, at the time of discharge from DOE, split sample might be reasonable. And these are, pardon the pun, but we might be splitting hairs here. The precise protocol for that does depend a lot on where the worker is going after they leave Richland.
Thank you. Dr. Martinique, I heard you say about legacy beryllium at Hanford and possibly from a machining operational type aspect of the facilities. I do believe it's probably the affected workers group's opinion that the way it was handled at Hanford in the years past, basically if you needed a drill press, you went over to the building and got it and had it moved out to your facility. And that's an avenue of how the beryllium spread on Hanford. It was quite common for people to just go rob parts from any facility that they needed at their facility. So, I applaud what you said, but I think some of the beryllium concerns we've had out here is how this stuff was spread. And it's not just from the, working in just the facilities that they machined it in.
No, that's the difficulty, and I think the report goes into great depth on, which I didn't specifically cover here because it's covered quite a bit in the report, on classifying the buildings. And I think the report shows that in the view of all the groups, not just myself, but also of Tom's group, that classification of the buildings as beryllium-free or beryllium-contaminated lacks a rigor that we would like to see. We would like to see a lot more sampling. As you say, it's very, very difficult sometimes to know exactly what happened in a particular building, whether somebody brought some piece of beryllium in and did a lot of work with it as a group and nobody ever really kept track of that. And so the only way you're going to really find out about that, unless you happen to interview the person that did that, is by pulling more samples. And so I think the group, and I'm not just attributing this just to me, but also to Tom's group, really felt that the building classification scheme really needs to be improved.
Let me just address the equipment thing. I think it's a very important point because it may not be the building per se, but something that's brought in. And this brings up the importance of the wipe sampling. You're not going to detect beryllium off a piece of equipment that's sitting with powder inside. Mm-hmm. But a thorough wipe job on the equipment would detect in most cases. And so it's that kind of rigor that we're referring to. And I think the Department of Energy, unfortunately, has plenty of experience now with the office building in Nevada and elsewhere that was supposedly just an office building, but in fact, it has a legacy of beryllium.
Thank you, Dr. Trey. Sorry if I butchered your name. I'd just like to echo what Dave said here. I think the beryllium workers and the beryllium affected workers are probably your best asset out there to make sure this program works. And I highly encourage that they're heavily involved in this process, and whatever process that is, to move forward. I know that there's a potential, who knows what's going to happen, what these facilities are going to be classified as now, that there's going to be a possible issue of the beryllium affected workers out there not having a place to go. And that's a big concern. We didn't ask for this, and we don't want to be sent home and don't have a job anymore. A lot of us are too young to have that happen. So I hope there's full support from the Department of Energy to take care of us until this process runs its course. I mean, some facilities might be classified as suspect until they are proven clean. And there's a potential that people that have been going to these facilities for years, all of a sudden are going to see a sign out there. And that concerns me on how that's going to be handled. But I fully hope that DOE will fully support what needs to be done here. And again, you know, use the people out there that probably know the best of what's going on.
Absolutely. There's no question that the workers are the best asset here to move forward, and DOE definitely will support the path forward and make sure that the workers feel that they can come back to the program and not have negative repercussions as a result of that. I believe Jerry, and then we'll take this question here. Jerry first.
Thank you. Jerry Paulette with Heart of America Northwest, and as Craig Hall said, I was one of the 3 members of the Hanford Joint Council that spent 2001-2002 doing a review of the Beryllium program. And I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Dr. Trier, Mr. Podansky, all of you up there, for a model of openness for investigation. I've never seen anything like what you did, not just the thoroughness, but as you said, 3 hours of debrief meetings in which workers and advocates and others were all able to be present and see transparently what was happening. My heart has been broken since 2003 when the Hanford site failed to implement the recommendations of the Hanford Joint Council, and seeing affected workers get sicker and sicker and more people added to their ranks every year. Knowing that the recommendations were sitting there and had been promised to be implemented and were not. And then in 2004, Dr. Martini participated in a second independent review with recommendations that also sat there and were never implemented, especially on characterization. And so I'm very concerned about what the implementation plans will be, and the commitment to openness and transparency for them, and input from the affected workers and others. I have several questions, if you'd bear with me, and I ask them one at a time. One is, in terms of the implementation plan, would the investigation team come back in a year or 15 months and do a report card? And will there be accountability for the contractors? We've several of us on the advisory board, like Keith Smith and I, have advocated for years that there has to be specific fee associated with these health and safety deficiencies and violations, and there never has been. So will there be an independent review come back in 15 months or a year and do a report card? And will there be fee associated with the failures? In fact, let me ask, will there be fee associated, loss of fee for the documented failures, I assume that are in the final report that were in the draft? Serious shortcomings and violations, non-compliances and bureaucraties, but violations where management knew of the failures and the extensive, overly long period of time it took just to have a Beryllium disease program update.
With respect to the independent review team coming back, Glenn Podansky has committed to putting the resources of the Health, Safety, and Security Office behind assisting us to make sure that we can actually implement a program that is going to be effective. So I believe that we can rely on him to help us deploy the same team or a different team as his resources allow. Go ahead.
Specifically for independent oversight, we routinely go back within 6 months to a year to check on the results of our inspection. And in this case, not only will we be doing that, one other area that I failed to mention, we also, Dave, when you asked about independence, we also take our report and we brief it up to Capitol Hill. We'll be briefing it to Senator Cantwell and Murray's staff, as well as to Hastings' staff. This is part of our routine. And we will come back both in support of Dr. Trier's corrective action program and where we can, as well as coming back in about a year to see if it's staying on course so it doesn't fall short of just an implementation plan that doesn't get implemented.
Thank you for that commitment.
And with respect to your other question, the environmental management program has a process that is implemented through the senior executives of the field sites as well as headquarters when we evaluate the issues associated with safety, which is such an important part of our work. And we make decisions on fee reductions in a routine manner. So we will continue that process. These particular issues associated with the Beryllium program are all important for the environmental management program and for the Department of Energy. So that is part of our process as we make fee determinations and in particular fee reductions as a result of failures in being able to keep the workers safe. Go ahead.
Mark's question highlighted, I think, the issue of medical removal. When a worker is sensitized, they need, under the rule, they are supposed to be provided with a workplace free of potential exposure to beryllium. And this has been a great concern, and the workers have rights under the rules that I'd like to ask the team members in terms of both what did you observe in terms of medical removal, not just the work restriction, but removal with an insurance that you had 2 years of income in an equivalent job if there wasn't a beryllium-free place for you to work. And secondly, what are the implications of the fact that you found very clearly that facilities were declared beryllium-free despite the fact that they had not been adequately characterized, and is there potential that affected workers were sent back into those buildings repeatedly because they were told it was beryllium-free, or based on airborne sampling, which wouldn't, as you said, have any chance of detecting what happens when someone hits the duct as opposed to the day that the person went in with the airborne sampler?
Let me start out by saying, you're right, there are facilities where we had concerns with regard to how they were characterized and assessed, and there is potential that individuals may have gone into those facilities. We don't know. With regard to restrictions, we had noted that in the few examples that we observed that the medical group had properly issued restrictions except for one case. But I think there was some concern that individuals that were affected were working in facilities that had known beryllium contamination. And I think that the process to go through those facilities or use a lapel sampler once a year with the individual to verify that they weren't being exposed to beryllium is inadequate. That has to be matched up with more than that. There are different work activities that could produce dust in those beryllium areas, and somehow that has to be married up with the work control process in an effective manner to assure that those types of activities don't occur and affect those particular individuals. John or Tim, do you have anything to add?
Maybe, if this will turn on. I think one of the concerns about, that has been floating around is that suddenly if all of a sudden we start looking at the buildings, that all the buildings will be contaminated, beryllium contaminated buildings, and I don't think that's the case, number one. I think what we're simply saying, we're not saying that all the buildings are contaminated and that there won't be any place for workers to go. I think what we're saying is that you need to do a good effort to make sure that beryllium workers, without their volition, are not assigned to a building where they might get an exposure. And I think that especially if you concentrate on those workers that are, those buildings that are housing workers now that have not been properly characterized, if you target those as your first buildings to reclassify or first buildings to look at, you can clear a lot of those buildings pretty fast, and it's not like it's going to take 5 years to do that. So I think you can get in, clear those buildings, and say, hey, we're going to give top priority to the buildings that we don't really have characterized well. We're going to give top priority to those buildings that, in fact, have beryllium-affected workers at them, and that way you'll impact fewer people, at least for shorter periods of time. So I think that can be done. I think it can be done in a faster than you might think. We're not, we're not saying that you have to actually decontaminate the building with wipes. We're just saying that you have to have a better idea than what has happened in the past.
Just to remind people of how far we have come, and don't get me started on the 8 years that we lost, but when we first started building characterizations, the arguments were that you really only have to characterize a building up to 8 feet, because that's what we always did for radiation. And so we have come a long way since that day. We have a long way to go, but there is progress being made in terms of the awareness and understanding. And I think this report really helps go to the next level on the importance of rigorous characterization, balanced by the fact that there are going to be plenty of buildings here where there is no beryllium, and work can go on.
I believe that there was a question here on the right.
Is DOE going to help fund the development of a real-time beryllium monitoring device?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
We're willing to. We've asked the technology people in headquarters to start looking, and they're doing that. I think the bag is looking for a viable option, and I've asked, we have a group, CRESP's consortium of universities, Vanderbilt, Rutgers, and a number of others. I've asked some of their professors to do a concerted effort to look at what's available for real-time, in-the-field monitoring for beryllium.
And if you have some knowledge or know of particular academic institutions that are leaders in this field, this is important, that we obtain all information, through the Hamtech, through the bag. We will definitely put resources towards trying to attain the objective that you have expressed.
I might just add that apart from DOE, virtually all of the beryllium facilities that we work with and that we know would gladly pay an awful lot for such a piece of equipment. A lot of these pieces of equipment have been promised, but when they get into the field, for some reason, they just don't seem to work very well. So, it's something that everybody is just hoping that we'll get soon, but so far, at least every attempt has been, unfortunately, fallen short.
I have a comment to make, if I might. I want to accept your invitation, the invitation that was issued for the Hanford Advisory Board to follow the implementation. We have several members on our board, one of whom is standing right there, who have grave concerns about the workforce, and we are all really heartened by the openness that this process has taken and the unique way that you have responded. And we accept your invitation, and we will continue to follow the implementation plan. Thank you.
And we will use the same degree of openness for the implementation plan as we move forward for the corrective actions, for this status of the corrective actions. And I think that having Pete Garcia lead this effort already clearly speaks about the openness that we're going to be utilizing in this process. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Trier. I really appreciate the opportunity to see what's going on here today. I've worked at Hanford off and on for 40 years, and this is the most positive and the most vigorous response to a worker safety issue that I've ever seen in that length of time. Appreciate it very much. My name is Keith Smith. I'm the chair of the Health, Safety, Environmental Protection Committee that, between a number of us, authored the advice, all the beryllium advices that you've seen, and which were passed by the HAB. And I'm not one, and Shirley and Dave both know, and some of the other managers to interface over the years know that I don't bring criticism without bringing what I think is a solution. And as Mike and I have pointed out, Mike Karenko, who's behind me here, one of the co-authors, has pointed out that one of the failures at Hanford that has created this situation is a lack of a vigorous integrated safety management system. Now, I know the top managers on this site are dedicated supporters of that, but getting it to drive all the way down through management, down to the workers, has not been very well done. And I had a privilege. Shirley offered me an opportunity a few years ago to be on an assessment team at the tank farms for integrated safety management. And it was clear to me what's going on. And I just want to tell you, senior managers that are here, that your attitude about the implementation of this program and integrated safety management and worker safety programs in general is very important to how well this is driven down through the ranks, because it only takes one hint from you to your subordinates that this is a burden, this is a difficulty, and it's a pain in the butt for them to get the message. And by the time it gets down to the workforce, it's just a flavor of the day. So that's my advice to you. You've got to get integrated safety management. I recommend that all of you implement a program similar to what the Mission Support Alliance is doing right now, where they've included enhanced work planning in their ISMS. I'd like you to take a look at that and for all of you to emulate that. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. We could not agree more. We accept the responsibility that we all have, Shirley, Dave, but also the heads of contract. As we all know, the head of contracts own a huge part of this responsibility because the workers work for those companies. And absolutely, our commitment, our embracing this report and the corrective actions that we are about to implement is essential for the credibility that we must bring to this effort so that it permeates through middle management and then to the workforce. We take your comments very seriously.
If I could also make a comment about that, and thank you, Keith, for that reminder of the importance of integrated safety management. There is a tool on the site today, the Employee Job Task Analysis, that's a component of that. This is now a 10-year-old tool. I'm just amazed that it has survived because it is one of the only tools that is truly site-wide, well, except for the construction workers. We don't need to get into that. But that is integrated across the contractors. It obviously needs more work in terms of its performance, but it is a very useful tool. It has shown that it can be used by all the contractors to help us identify those workers at risk and contribute to the integrated safety management that is so needed. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mike Karenko. I'm Deputy Chair of Keith's Safety Committee on the Hanford Advisory Board. And again, I'd also like to thank you for your effort here. It's truly heartwarming to see this caring for the employees. I had just a couple of questions and comments. First of all, with respect to the integrated safety management, I truly saw how effective that was. I was involved, I was an executive vice president of closure at Rocky Flats, and we relied on that daily, and it meant at the worker level. And surely it is part of the answer to the tank vapors, a big part of that answer, as we're discussing, as a separate issue. With respect to the technology, the HAB has repeatedly brought up a suggestion for looking at a small company that might have potential handheld technology. It needs to be developed. It may not work, but they do have unique dual laser technology and a self-contained power apparatus. We have spent 15 months and several calls and have no takers. And the reason given is, oh yes, they can develop it, but we can't use it because it hasn't gone through all the pedigrees. And our point is develop it, put on your desk, have it augment your old technology of wiping. And we're not saying this company can do it, but it's an indication of the resistance for new change that is within the organization. If it's not a national lab, like we understand Livermore is getting it, the small companies is where there's a lot of entrepreneurial ideas, and there's got to be some kind of vehicle to grasp and bring in their thinking to put on this. Because if we had this handheld detector, it'd be safer, but also from standpoint of taxpayers' dollars, the productivity of the cleanup would increase. You wouldn't be slowed down by stopping. So it is a dual benefit to us.
We will have Pete Garcia deploy a group of experts, and we can assist with expertise from headquarters. Maybe also our colleagues in HSS, can assist us by deploying one of their experts, and we will be visiting this particular small business to make sure that we understand their capability, and then depending on those results, we will work on a valid mechanism for exploring moving forward with the technology that we see in that company. So we will make sure that we get together with the Hanford Advisory Board today to make sure that we can have that visit. I understand, your point of whether or not, a particular piece of equipment has the regulatory pedigree, if you will, but I also agree that exploring the different private industry or academia efforts in academic institutions that may get us to a better way to detect beryllium contamination is essential. So we are going to be working then with the HAB. Pete Garcia will be working with you to make sure that we can deploy a group of experts, one from headquarters, one here from the site, one from HSS, and of course, we invite the Beryllium Awareness Group, HAMTech, to come with us, and we will go and explore, the capability of this particular organization.
Thank you for your comments. Maybe you could help put down a rumor that's flying around, and there's a rumor that Secretary Chu is going to dissolve the HSS. And if that's the case, how can you come back in a year? So please put that publicly to rest.
I assure you that we cannot do our job without Glenn Podansky and his colleagues in HSS, and I assure you that Secretary Chu also have the utmost respect for Glenn Podansky and his colleagues. They are very important to the safety envelope of the Department of Energy, and they clearly have demonstrated their leadership and expertise here in this particular effort.
Thank you.
And we also have very sensitive photographs.
And you may have already addressed it in the report, in the final report, about the exposure level of beryllium. We know that it's very toxic, and we're using a 2005 ACGIH exposure level. And I was wondering if we addressed that in the final draft, that we do have a 2009, which is a lot more restrictive and would help in preventing more exposures if that was followed. But I don't know how you guys had talked about that in your final report.
Okay, I can start, and then maybe you can follow, John. We do have a specific section of the report on the 2009 ACGIH TLVs, and we have recommendations that it should be evaluated. Switching over to that methodology, there are some differences. There's some different equipment. You go from measuring the total particulate in the air to the inhalable fraction, so it requires different equipment. It requires some changes in the laboratory analysis techniques. Although we believe it's feasible, and there's some recommendations in there too, and I think the chronic beryllium disease prevention program here also suggests that consideration of measuring both the total and the inhalable be given to particular work activities. So we have recommendations to further evaluate that and consider that. We did note, however, in the report that for most of the beryllium work activities where they're expecting beryllium to be dispersed in the area and they take sampling measurements, for the most part, those measurements are coming up below detectable, and there's very few that are even above the 0.05. So, you know, with the urgency to us seem to be better placed at getting proper facility characterizations to know where the beryllium is, but certainly it's something that needs to be considered. John?
Yeah, and we did tackle that quite a bit, and the difficulty appears to be, right now, the difficulty with the standard, with the ACGIH standard, which you're talking about, the 2009 was the American Conference of Governmental and Industrial Hygienists standard that dropped it down to 0.05 and made it so that you actually had to do an inhalable sample. And it's sort of like a catch-22 is there's no good inhalable samplers. And so that's a problem. But what I suggested, and I think the way it was written in the document, in the final document, was let's not worry about whether we're doing an IOM, inhalable sample right now. Let's just say we're going to worry about that level. We're going to take it and worry about the level, getting the level as low as possible. And because in your case, in the case of Hanford, I personally don't believe there's going to be a huge difference between the results using the inhalable sampler and a total dust sampler. So, and I think that what we suggested was that, in fact, the facility that Hanford consider actually going below 0.05 and going to 0.02, which is the detection level, and that any time that they have a hit above 0.02, that they investigate that. So that's essentially saying they're going to go down to 0.02. That's what I would do if it was me. I'd say, when the inhalable samplers finally get up to the point where we can use them, great, we'll use them. But right now, let's just take our total dust samples and drop the level down to 0.02, our detection limit. And I believe that's what we recommended in the report.
The report does recommend investigation of all samples above detectable.
And just to be clear about that, in complement with wipe sampling, so there is a additional rigorous approach.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Tony James. I direct the United States Transuranium and Uranium Registries here at WSU. I want to point out, maybe people don't realize, that we have 329 very good personal samplers for beryllium dating back over the whole history of the defense nuclear facilities. These are workers who have donated their bodies or tissues, and this is something we're just now getting into because of the great concern over beryllium. We can actually measure beryllium concentrations in all of the tissue samples that we've looked at. In terms of gross concentrations, we can certainly measure in the lung. What we found very recently, we're also able to identify beryllium particles in lymph nodes, and I think we can push this technique even further to quantitatively measure beryllium particles in the lung itself. Obviously, there's a big potential to look back over the industrial hygiene records that we got for these workers and try and correlate where the donors worked with the actual body burdens. We can also look at which of these people actually triggered beryllium sensitivity. So there's a huge new capability that's now there with people, the very best samplers, because these people sampled beryllium throughout their careers in the defense nuclear facilities. Let's look at the levels. Let's start quantifying the tissue burdens of beryllium. I'd be extremely happy to work with any members of your group to see what we can do from these donors who have volunteered their tissues. Thank you.
I'm Don Slaw, Hemtech Safety Rep, and I really appreciate Tom and the efforts you guys coming out and doing this assessment. It adds credibility having workers on this, and I appreciate Dave Molna assigning us to this. One of the things, I've been out here for 20 years, and one of the things I've noticed is the workforce is very smart. And with that educated workforce, sometimes it's hard for like BAG members and some of the workers that have been out here to educate some of the new people come out, like an IH who, you know, it took me 20 years to learn how to spell beryllium, and these guys are coming out here and they're supposed to be sampling it. So one of the questions I have is actually two. The report, when you're done with it, you're going to come up with corrective actions. Are you going to incorporate using Hamtech and the BAG on the corrective actions as well?
Absolutely, yes. We will work collaboratively with Hamtech and the Beryllium Awareness Group. We were going to use the same amount of openness and collaborative effort that we had for this report.
Excellent, thank you. The other question I had was, in the report, and I had the opportunity to read the draft, one of the areas we looked at as an opportunity, and I do look at these opportunities as good things, and it's a healthy having the opportunity to look at our problems and the areas where we need to do better. One of the areas we have out there is the labs. WRPS takes care of the labs, takes care of the facilities, but we have the ATL people that take care and do the sampling. One of the things that has been noticed is they utilize that lab, has been characterized as a lab, even though there's a lot of production things that go on there. And Tom, we talked a little bit about that, and my question is, in the report it gave the recommendation to do, reconsider that with the ORP and the contractor, whether or not it really met the criteria on all those four things to say that they were a lab and shouldn't fall under the 850 rule, where we have workers that should be protected under the 850 rule.
That's correct, and that recommendation is still in the report.
Any other questions or comments? My understanding is that the report is available here today. Back there, yes, maybe you can raise your hand. It's in the back table. And in addition to that, it is going to be a part of the website of the Health, Safety, and Security Office, and the Hanford website, you know, our own website here will direct you. We'll have a link so that we can direct you to the website of the Office of Health, Safety, and Security in the department. Yeah. Any further questions or comments? Well, if not, we really thank you for the exchange that we have had today. We will take your comments extremely seriously, and we will keep you fully informed of our path forward. Thank you.